I do want to welcome everyone to Fellowship Church. As I say every time, I have a hard time wrapping my brain around it, but we're one church in 10 different locations here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Miami, East Texas, even London, England. And also, this is very, very exciting, we have people that talk to us around the world. In some of the countries that I don't think they're even supposed to be watching this, they do log on. So isn't that cool? What a great, great thing. And you know, it takes a lot of unselfish people, and you guys are so unselfish, to grow a great church, because if it were up to me, I think I would still have maybe one service and a giant auditorium, and you know, I could just speak one time and leave. But no, God has better things in store, and we have just a great, great church. Anyway, today we're continuing our series called Mythbusters, and one of my favorite people in the world is our special guest. He is one of the most successful radio talk show hosts in America. He married way over his head. His wife is named Lisa. His son is named Ethan. And his show is called Allen Iverson, The Answer. Anyone remember Allen Iverson? Yeah, The Answer. Well, this is the true answer. And it's from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. That's Central Standard Time. It's called The Mark Davis Show on 660 a.m. Just think Allen Iverson, The Answer. But no disrespect to Allen, this guy is on HNL, a whole nother level compared to Allen Iverson. So he's been a part of Fellowship Church, he and his family, and they're just the real deal. What you hear and what you see, whether he's on television a lot, or on radio, is the same as when he's off the stage. And better than that, he has written a best-selling book. He's written a best-selling book. I caught you while you were on the phone. That's okay. Man, give it up for Chris. He runs the show down here. This is not easy. He's got people texting him and talking to him, and yeah, it's crazy. You know, Fellowship Church is like a restaurant, Mark. You know, you go to a really cool restaurant and you hear the music and everything looks clean and great and everything, but in the kitchen, as I said earlier, a while back, several weeks ago, it's chaotic. So sometimes it's chaotic, but hey, Chris thrives on chaos. Anyway, he's written Lone Star America. I love this. How Texas can save our country. Stand to your feet and welcome my main man, Mark Davis.
Oh my. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you more than I can say. This is very, very special. I was telling Ed, I've done a lot of talking for a living. I've done a lot of speaking engagements, but there's nothing that's quite been like this. There's nothing that's meant something to the extent that this means something to me, because I've seen all the speakers, especially in this series. Let's go 2 weeks back. How big is Hugh Ross's brain? Was that something? Last week, we had another great speaker. That would be Pastor Ed, his own self. And I was here, Lisa and I usually do, Lisa and Ethan, Regina and I, when she comes, we are able to do usually the 10 or the 11:30. We did last Saturday. My eyes are now just readjusting from Ed's pants last Saturday evening. And it was just all part of the message, man. It's all part of the message. And a word about the message that I and my family have received here, and then we'll dive into a little bit of God and government. I talk a lot about government, talk a lot about God on the show, and a lot of times I end up talking about church because I'm proud to be a member here and have been for 4 years. And people call me back, thank you. It's not about me, it's about y'all, because here's where we're going. Sometimes people will call and go, Mark, yeah, was that your pastor and his wife in bed on the roof of that church? Why, yes, it was. That was called the sex experiment, and it was awesome. And I had Ed and Lisa on the radio when they were up there on the roof on TV under glaring TV lights reflecting off the white covers. So they had endured, when I was talking to them, I was watching them on TV at the same time on the feed, and there they were having, that glare had come up at them and had burned them. Do you remember? They looked like they'd been in some type of industrial accident. And they got over that. It was just part of the sacrifice of delivering that magnificent message. And people said, should your pastor be talking about sex? I hope he does. I hope pastors talk about sex. I hope your church tells you about sex, because if your church doesn't tell you about sex through God and through the marital bond, then you're getting the message from the world, and you don't want to get that message from the world. So I thank God my pastor was talking about sex. And then there was that day, a little bit before that, I believe, when what kind of car was that you rolled up here on that stage? That big white, was it a Rolls? Was it a Bentley? It was an actual Rolls Royce. And it was the RPM series, Relationships, Passion, Marriage. And it was like you're driving, you're the parents, you're driving, your kids are in the back seat, and they're just watching everything you do. It was one of the best metaphors I could possibly imagine. And now I just want to explain to y'all that I was here. My family was here for that message. This is more than 3 years ago, probably. I wasn't listening. Not enough. Not enough. I've been here for 4 years of incredible messages and listened fully to about 3 years of them, and that would be the most recent 3. I mention this before I get launching off on my material because maybe it's some of you, and if it is, I want to feel you and I want you to feel me. Communication, which is kind of my business, needs 3 things: a sender, a message, and a listener. Those are the 3 elements of communication. And in God's relationship with us, we are the listener. The message is His word. He's the sender. He's always there. The message is always there. But as the listeners, sometimes we don't bat 1,000. So I was listening, some, obeying, some, but not enough. And it took me some time, too much time, to turn life around and start obeying full time. Listen to every word Ed said, every word God said. And for those of you watching it on Fellowship Live, all our locations in Fellowship Live, that puts you in the gracious, technical, and wise hands of my buddy Andy Boyd. God bless Andy. Not just of service to this church, but a great blessing to our family and a great blessing to me as my friend. A year ago, I stepped into the water with Andy, got baptized in the backyard of this church. And it was life-changing. Actually, it wasn't life-changing. My life had changed already. It was life-defining. So if this is your week, if this is your year to get baptized, do what's necessary and do it, and do it, and do it here. All right. With your permission, can I talk about how great God is and how great America is at the same time? All right. Because people freak out when you talk about both of them at the same time. And thank you so much for putting the monstrous slide of the book up. I really appreciate that. And if you just can't get through the weekend without a copy of the book, I think we have some. And I think I'm gonna make my way to the atrium and even sign some for you after we're done. So the series is Mythbusters. So I had a crazy idea. Let's bust some myths. Myth number 1. Our founding fathers were not particularly mindful of God in creating our nation. They were just up to a noble task. The freedom thing, the liberty thing sounded pretty good. But you know what? There was no real reason for America to exist. It didn't have to happen. All these people guided by liberty, guided by religious freedom, guided by the thought that we should be able to experience all kinds of things without an oppressive state-run church or an oppressive dictatorship. There was no reason this had to happen. Just like as Hugh Ross said, there was no reason the universe had to happen. Somebody made that happen. And I believe somebody made America happen. And our founders believed the same. Let's take a look at some words of the founding fathers. Let's take a look at Samuel Adams, an actual signer of the Declaration of Independence. And he wrote on July 4th, 1776, "We have this day restored the sovereign to whom all men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and from the rising to the setting of the sun, let his kingdom come, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Our first president was, of course, George Washington, father of our country, a great leader, a great political figure, and a man with some very specific thoughts about God, as he, in October of 1789, established the day on which we celebrate Thanksgiving. He wrote at that time, "It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor." Not just the father of our country, but he had our father in mind as he ascended to that title. Thomas Jefferson wrote something in 1774 called a summary view of the rights of British America. Now, it's at this point, we have tons of locations at Fellowship, a lot in the DFW area, Fellowship Live everywhere, and of course, London. This is the part where we go back to the point where everybody watching in London, this is the part where we broke away from you. No hard feelings. No hard feelings. We love y'all. It's great. We're feeling you. It's good. Across the ocean, we're good. However, did what we had to do. You know what I'm saying? And Jefferson, well before he became our third president, wrote in a summary view of the rights of British America, because that's what it was at the time, "God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that His justice cannot sleep forever." We could say that largely today, couldn't we? But it was Thomas Jefferson. So, when people say our founding fathers were just eager for freedom, they weren't really thinking about God in the process, that is a myth, and that myth is busted. Now we're talking. Let's talk about our founders. Myth number 2, our founders wanted a wall of separation between church and state that should eliminate all references to God when government is involved. Is the separation of church and state by those words in the Constitution? Correct, class, correct. Let's take a look at the First Amendment and what it actually says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So what does it mean to establish a religion? Well, to establish a religion means you establish a religion. This will be our established religion. It doesn't mean you have to be Christian if we say we're a Christian nation. It doesn't mean that that's mandatory. It identifies the prevailing faith of our people and the basis for our culture and our history. We have complete religious freedom in America. But the people who seek to erase our Judeo-Christian heritage to install their secularism as a national religion, they must be fought at every battlefield. We are a nation filled with God believers, founded by God believers, who said there will be no religious test for public office or for citizenship, but those who insist that this meant no recognition of God in our governance, they fail to see things like the biblical images that can be found in both the U.S. Capitol and the Supreme Court. So when people invoke this impenetrable wall of separation between church and state, you tell them that is a myth, and that myth is busted. Now we're cooking. Myth number 3, you can't have the 10 Commandments at City Hall. You can't have a nativity scene at City Hall or the 10 Commandments at the state capitol. Can't do that. Unconstitutional. It's not so very long before we'll be in the Christmas season and you will see stories once again, because I don't think it's gone away. Have we heard the stories that have the theme of the war on Christmas? And people say, oh, that's overstated. There's no war on Christmas, please. But there are people for whom the mere celebration of Christmas is just a complete freak out. And I know it's September, but they've been ready for Christmas at Hobby Lobby since the 4th of July. And that's good, I'm good with that. Behind me you see a little something in the city of Philadelphia, which we've already talked a little bit about. Know what that is? The sign says it. It is the Christmas Village. And brace yourself, it's on city property. And in 2010, you may remember this small controversy because we talked about it on the show. Since it was on city property, there are people who said, oh, no. That is an unconstitutional conflation of the religious and the municipal, and it's got to go. And the then mayor of Philadelphia said, all right, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to rename it. We're going to call it Holiday Village. That lasted about 5 minutes. The people rose up and said, oh, no. We're not making people celebrate Christmas in Philadelphia. We don't make anybody be Christmas, be Christian. It is a mere acknowledgement that we are a town, a city, where a whole lot of people celebrate Christmas. Even Jay Leno had some fun with this. He said, you heard about Philadelphia. I can't do Leno. Can't do Leno. Stop it. Just stop that right now. He said they're trying to turn it into Holiday Village. Change the name from Christmas to Holiday Village. They're not even Santa's reindeer anymore. They are now non-denominational venison. It was an acknowledgement of a community that celebrates Christmas. If you move somewhere and it is vastly majority Jewish or vastly majority Muslim or vastly majority Buddhist or whatever, I would expect to see some recognition of that at the courthouse, at City Hall or somewhere. And at no point would I go, uh-oh, they're making me believe that, because I would know that I still have the freedom to be religiously free. Now let's come a little bit home. Let's come from Philadelphia right to the state capital of Texas, where you can find this monument to the 10 Commandments on the state capitol in Austin, Texas. And of course, people have been filing suit against it roughly every day at lunchtime since they put it up. And Attorney General Greg Abbott, who I think is about to enter a new job, has said, oh, gee. I won't go political on you unless you want me to. Now, just a statement of fact. I think it's going to happen, but while in his remaining tenure as Attorney General, when he leaves the office of Attorney General, one of the proudest things he did was stick up for that monument. Because there were people who said, oh, that says that's all that Texans believe, that nobody can believe anything else. Because half of the 10 Commandments are good advice for anyone. Don't kill anybody, don't commit adultery, don't steal. But the other 5 are specific instructions for the religious faithful. No other gods before me. Keep the Sabbath holy. And that's a good point. Some of them are indeed specific instructions for the religious faithful. But that monument on the state capitol grounds does what the Christmas Village did in Philadelphia. It simply acknowledges that this is a strain of belief, that this is a heritage of belief that has defined our life here in Texas. And as I was writing the book, as I was writing Lone Star America, the whole premise was, not just in terms of low taxes and better jobs and good regulation and various things, but also we really love America here in Texas, and we really love our God here in Texas. And it makes me, and I know that other states do, we're not the only state where that's true, but the main premise of the book was that if America were run more like Texas, it might be a little less messed up. And but since this was a Texas example, since the 10 Commandments monument was something that happened right here, it goes to the myth that when people say the Constitution forbids any public display that acknowledges the religious nature of our historical roots, that is a myth, and that myth is? Thank you so much. This one might be there's got to be one trick one in here. You ready? Myth number 4. Our freedoms come from the Constitution. Let's go to the Declaration of Independence first. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by whom? By their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Rights do not come from the Constitution. Rights come from God. Now, why is that important? Why is that distinction so vital? Come from God, come from the Constitution. I still got them. What difference does it make? Someone could say if they were not particularly religiously wired. Well, this is why even the agnostic should care about this. If the concept exists in our society that rights come from God, if they come from man, they could be taken away. It's vital to understand that basic liberties are not just some list that we cobbled together that sounded nice. They are from God himself so that we could create a nation to live to the fullest potential that God envisioned for each of us. Can you do that in China today? Could you do that in the old Soviet Union? Could you do that in the British colonies before we broke free? The very concept of America involved the placing in concrete of the biblical notion of free will and moral conduct as the rule of law. The origin of that lies not with man, but with God and his Son. The Constitution identifies those rights. They don't come from the Constitution. The Constitution identifies those rights and makes clear what government cannot do to abridge them. So when people say our rights come from the Constitution, maybe on this one we don't get up in their face and go, busted. Maybe we simply civilly tell them that we revere the Constitution for identifying those rights, but our rights come from God. It's a well-meaning error some folks make, so we won't get in their faces about that. But this next one requires us to have a little bit of attitude. Myth number 5, our schools should not touch the subject of religion in our history. Once again, the notion that God should be purged from any environment featuring tax dollars. We have grown so frightened of the possibility of religious indoctrination in the wind that we have failed to teach the facts of our nation's birth, that we were founded by men very mindful of God. The founders never really envisioned government schools. We kind of did that, and it's worked out well in many, many ways. The public schools, though, know that they have to accommodate kids of all faiths. That's fine, too. When you get to the point where, wow, should schools lead our kids in prayer? Should there be religious instruction from our public schools? I understand that's tricky, because everybody of every faith has to be there. And the best place for teaching children about God is in the home and this building right here. And truth be told, I'm just glad if the schools can get our kids through math. I mean, I don't want to overburden them, okay? We'll handle the God thing, we're good. Just, get geometry, and I'm just so happy. So should public school children be taught about the Bible? Of course. Not in a manner that says you should or you must believe this, but so that they can recognize, so that every child can know that the laws of Moses, the teachings of Jesus, are woven through the fabric of the ethics and the morality of the entire Western world. To fail to teach that is to fail to teach. So when people say schools should not even address religion, that's a myth, and that myth is? Now we're back on track. Here's number 6. Let's talk about some leaders. Here's one that people say, in a country that has to be religiously inclusive, where there is no official state religion, all true and all true, people will often say, our leaders should muzzle their own expressions of faith. Want to show you a picture? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The date was December 8th, 1941. You know what had happened the day before, the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is the gathering of Congress to which FDR delivered the famous Day of Infamy speech. And he said at that time, put yourself in that room among those people as the President of the United States said this: no matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but we will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. But with confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, December 8th, 1941, unabashedly, unashamedly, unhesitatingly invoking God as the engine of our victory. And I'll say this purely non-politically, I'm serious. I want leaders to say those kinds of things about the wars that we're in today. That we will stop it from happening now, we will stop it from happening again, and you bet we will claim God is on our side and against our enemy's side. Let's go to a very cold day in January 1961, the JFK inaugural. At the only inauguration speech that John F. Kennedy got to deliver, he said two things that I want to share from that speech. That, once again, the most famous part of that speech is something else. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That was in the last paragraph of that speech. Before that very famous, oft-repeated part, JFK said, "The world is very different now. For man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God." And he then said a few paragraphs later, "Whether you are citizens of America or of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own." John F. Kennedy, 1961. You bet. Please note that the conservative Republican talk show guy has offered up 2 Democrat presidents. Let's even it up now. Put them up. It's almost not fair. Oh. Scoreboard. No. President Reagan, we could go all the way through to Sunday morning with some of the things that Ronald Reagan said about God, but I have 2. One is very heavy and one's somewhat lighter. He said about this country, "A divine plan placed this great continent between the oceans to be found by a people from every corner of the earth who had a special love of faith, freedom, and peace." A divine plan placed this great continent between the oceans. You either believe that or you don't. It's kind of funny. I think it's foolish to believe that the universe just happened by happy accident. I think it's equally silly to think that America was just another country that somebody cobbled together. And President Reagan also said, "Sometimes when I'm faced with an atheist, I'm tempted to invite him to the greatest gourmet dinner that one could ever serve. And when we have finished eating that magnificent dinner, I would ask him if he believes there is a cook." So when people say it's wrong for our leaders to express their faith, tell them that's a myth, and that myth is busted. All righty. You can't legislate morality. People say that all the time. No, you can't legislate morality. All laws have an underpinning of morality. It's just a matter of whose morality is the foundation. Murder is illegal. It's a moral judgment. Which drugs are legal and which are not? Moral assertions. Will we have laws reflecting the morality of those who will protect the unborn or not? You definitely can legislate morality. Will we have laws permitting the death penalty, which is scriptural, or not? Even on fiscal issues like taxes and spending, there's a moral component. It is immoral, I think, to lure people into relying on some enormous, all-powerful government from cradle to grave so they lose the ability to reach their full God-given potential from their own labors and liberty. So, when people say there should be no moral component to legislation, that's a myth, and that myth is Yes, it is. Now, let me show you something else. I'll show you a picture. You tell me if you recognize it. I think you will. It is, of course, the American flag. It's not any American flag. That is the actual Star-Spangled Banner. It's at the Smithsonian. That's what flew over Fort McHenry as Francis Scott Key wrote those words, those magnificent words in the War of 1812. I love the national anthem. I'm going to give you its last verse, which I think I like as much as the first. I will say it. Lord knows I will not sing it, but you know the tune, so follow it, just sort of follow the cadence. Oh, thus be it ever, when free men shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. The last verse of the Star-Spangled Banner. If we can, let's conclude with a prayer, please. Bow your heads and join me, if you will. Lord, we thank you for creating this land as a beacon for freedom and liberty for all. And we know this has not come to pass by accident. We know from your word in the book of Psalms, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he has chosen as his own inheritance. From heaven he looks down and sees all mankind. From his dwelling place he watches. Watch us, Lord, in this great nation you've made. Watch us, guide us along your path as we enjoy all the freedoms and liberties which are gifts not from our fellow man, but from you. We know that we are asked to do more than believe in God. To say that we believe in God is just a statement of fact. Satan believed in God. We are to do more than believe in God. We are to remove a word. We are to believe God. Believe what you say. Believe that you and your son Jesus are real in our lives and live accordingly. When we do that, we don't just believe in God, we believe God, as our founders did and as we are called to do. God bless this great nation. Amen. And thank you all so very, very much.
Mark, thank you. Mark Davis.